Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks for inviting me. So Zionism is a political movement based on the idea that Jews constitute a national group. And as such, they have the right to self-determination. And Zionism combines this idea with a project that the Jews have the right to build their national homeland in Palestine. So the talk I'm going to give is in three parts. The first part, I want to look at the idea fundamental to Zionism that the Jews are an ethnic group and that Jews of all countries constitute a single national entity. I mean, nation states have most often, nearly always, been built on the construction of some ethnic identity. It's often dubious, England for the English, Poland for the Poles, etc. But the Jews are not an ethnic group. Judaism is a religion. And many different peoples from many different parts of the Mediterranean and elsewhere converted to Judaism and lived as Egyptian Jews, Persian Jews, Greek Jews, etc. for centuries. Going to look at that more, but secondly, I'm going to look at anti-Semitism. You can accept that the Jews are not an ethnic group, but still argue that a Jewish identity was created out of the anti-Semitism against them, and that this Jewish identity is equivalent to other people's nationalist identities. It's true that Zionism was a response to anti-Semitism, but it was a particular response at a particular moment of history. Zionism was a response to late 19th century European Christian anti-Semitism. But Zionists living in Christian Europe at that time, they saw it as an anti-Semitism for all time, against all Jews everywhere. And of course, we have to look at the Holocaust. The massacre of 6 million Jews and the attempted elimination of European Jewry by the Nazis, that meant support for Zionism. And the creation of a Jewish state was a response to the Holocaust. But I will argue it was never, even at that terrible point in history, the answer to anti-Semitism. Thirdly, I want to look at how Zionism succeeded. What is Zionism now, briefly? How did a settler colonialist project of a small number of people in a time post-World War II, when anti-colonialist struggles were succeeding throughout the world, how was it that they established a new colonial, ethnically defined state? And very briefly, what does Zionism mean for the Israeli state now? So firstly, the idea that the Jews are a people and therefore have a right to their own country was not the way that Jews had been regarded or regarded themselves. Jews followed Judaism, the religion, and the Holy Land and Jerusalem were regarded as the Muslims regard Mecca, as Christians regard Bethlehem, as holy places for pilgrimage and prayer, but not as a homeland. You don't have to go there. Jews lived in many, many lands and regarded these lands as their homelands. But central to Zionism is establishing this link with Palestine, calling it the restoration or the return. But what if Jews never came from a place called Israel or Judea, were not exiled, were not dispersed after the first and second temples, the fall of the first and the second temples, and are not a diaspora, i.e., they have not been wandering in exile since? Evidence gathered by many historians, linguists, archaeologists, even geneticists, has been silenced or sidelined to make a religious text, the Old Testament Bible, fit a nationalist narrative. Real history shows that as the Persians and then the Greeks and then the Romans developed their empires, people around the shores of the Mediterranean came to these new expanding cities, and monotheism fitted this new world better than their particular tribal pagan gods. I mean, look at the Greek gods, ridiculous. Judaism was the main monotheism around, and many people converted. And its growth, the growth of Judaism, was only halted by the popularity of the next monotheism in exactly the same place, Christianity. And later, the peoples of the same geographical region, many of them converted to Islam. By the time Zionism was born in the late 19th century, 90% of the world's entire Jewish population was like my dad, Ashkenazim, descended from Jews from the Khazarian conversion, who had settled for centuries in Russia and Eastern Europe. These Jews' ancestors did not come from Palestine. The right to return of world Jewry to modern Israel is based on a construct that is full of myths and lies. Just contrast that for a moment with the Palestinians' right to return, based on reality, on justice, enshrined in the Geneva Convention, international law, and UN resolutions for a good reason, because it gives people forcibly expelled in times of war the right to return to their homes. The world we have now has given Jews around the world the right to go to Israel, and Palestinians who have the keys to their grandparents' homes, if those homes are still standing, many aren't, many have been demolished, have no right to return. So the second part of this talk is about Zionism as a response to anti-Semitism. Zionism is predicated on the idea that Jews will never be accepted in other lands. But the Jews in Europe, let alone in the Middle East and Asia, have not always lived as the victims of oppression. There have been many, many times when they flourished. However, it is true that at times when societies underwent rapid and unsettling change, and especially true as capitalism developed in Christian medieval Europe, and also because of the economic roles they undertook or were forced into, in many places they were not allowed, like in Europe, allowed to buy land. When there was trouble, as we know, then as now, racism, Jews provided a handy scapegoat. There is a fantastic book by this guy called The Jewish Question, Abram Leon, which discusses that, a Marxist interpretation. Abram Leon, I think, was 24 or 25 when he died in Auschwitz. But he held a socialist view of Jews, not a Zionist view. So let's get back to where the crux of where Zionism grew. It was the death throes of the Tsarist Empire, which formed the context for the violent, horrendous anti-Semitic pogroms at the end of the 19th century, as the ruling class blamed Jews for the crisis. There were different responses to this wave of anti-Semitism. Most emigrated, but the promised land they sought was not Palestine. It's the usual promised land. It's the US, it's America. From 1880 to 1929, that's nearly 50 years, more than 3 million Jews had quit Eastern Europe for the US, and another 500,000 for Western Europe. By contrast, in these 50 years, only 120,000 Jews chose to go to Palestine. Now, Zionists, of course, from the beginning encouraged Jews to go to Palestine, and they made overtures to the most revolting anti-Semitic leaders in Europe. They appealed to their anti-Semitism It goes hand in hand with Zionism. You don't want us, it's fine, we want to leave, we want to go to Palestine. Actually, I'm going to screen share now because this is a Zionist leader in 1912. Each country can only absorb a limited number of Jews if she doesn't want disorders in her stomach. Germany already has too many Jews. Yeah, very nice. Oh, that's Chaim Weizmann, leader of the World Zionist Organization at the time. Let's go to one which is very hard to stomach. This is Ben-Gurion, 1938. Think what is happening in the 1930s to Jews in Germany. And this is what Ben-Gurion says at the Evian conference, which is convened in order to address the problem of what is happening to Jews in Germany. And this is what he says. If I knew that it would be possible to save all the children in Germany by bringing them over to England, and only half of them to Israel, then I would opt for the second alternative. Just let that sink in for a moment. Willing for half the Jewish children in Germany to die? For we must weigh not only the life of those children, but also the history of the people of Israel. Ben-Gurion was so full of so many appalling lies and propaganda, but very powerful in his use of them. So we're going to just move to 1947 here. After the Holocaust, there are no less than 450,000 Jewish refugees in 1947 in Europe. So what do the great powers do? They continue to prohibit entry to their countries to the survivors of genocide, Britain included. Between 1945 to 1948, only 25,000 Jews were permitted to settle in the US. And that was why so many went to Palestine. It was not their first choice. It was not where they wanted to go, but there wasn't much option for many. But there's a third option to immigration to the US or to Palestine, and that is to stay put and fight for your rights where you are. This is from Marek Edelman, who fought in the Warsaw Ghetto and survived and stayed in Poland. He did not go to Israel. He said, the Bundists did not wait for the Messiah, nor did they plan to leave for Palestine. They believed that Poland was their country, and they fought for a just socialist Poland in which each nationality would have its own cultural autonomy and in which minority rights would be guaranteed. In the Jews in Poland and Lithuania formed, as it says here, the Bundists, the Bund, and their slogan in the 1930s, they were the majority, not the Zionists, they were the majority of Jews. Their slogan was "Wir sind da," we are here. And they would fight for their rights where they were. So, as I say, before the Holocaust, they were the majority. Zionists were a minority. My father in the 30s in Poland, he was a Zionist Jew. And he used to say the Zionists were middle-class Jews who got rich Jews to pay for poor Jews to go to Palestine. It was not an attractive prospect. And as we see, very few went. Okay, the third part of this talk, I'm going to address how did the colonial enterprise of land settlement based on expulsion of the native people happen. To understand this, we have to understand how Zionism fitted with the needs of the great imperialist powers. First, Britain, before World War I, and pre-World War II, and later the US, post-World War II. If we go to another slide, This is how it fitted. I think this is Herzl, who is the founder of Zionism in 1897. He recognizes how valuable they can be to England, the British Empire. He says, England with her possessions in Asia should be most interested in Zionism, for the shortest cut to India is by way of Palestine. England's politicians were the first to recognize colonial expansion. And so I believe in England, the idea of Zionism, which is a colonial idea, should be easily understood. And it was. And then we have Chaim Weizmann, who I've quoted before, another who became leader of the World Zionist Organization. He wrote that Britain should encourage Jewish settlement in order to bring back civilization and form an effective guard for the Suez Canal. So really, it was recognized by British imperialism. I mean, I could give you quotes from Churchill, from Balfour, from Lloyd George, who all echo how important it is, hence the Balfour Declaration, hence the backing for Jewish immigration, all the way through the British Mandate. Now and again, they stop Jewish immigration as a sop to, or there's a few Arab riots going on. But basically, they back this idea to have a loyal enclave watching over the Suez Canal for the interests of the British Empire. And it's also important, it's so key to understand the establishment of a Jewish state and its support by our ruling class and by the US ruling class, because however many international laws and UN resolutions and Geneva Conventions it breaks, and however many war crimes Israel commits, it continues to be an ally of Western imperialism. It remains now the central pillar of US imperialist strategy in the Middle East. Receiving in the memoranda of understanding from successive US presidents, Obama included, the commitment of the US to maintain Israel's military superiority over the rest of the region, whatever it does. So I'm going back and forth in history a bit because I'm quoting Zionists to you who saw all this. Vladimir Jabotinsky, in 1923, he is touring Poland and Germany and trying to get people to move to Palestine. He's a Zionist, obviously. And he says, he recognizes early on, Jewish settlement can thus develop under the protection of a force that is not dependent on the local population, behind an iron wall, which they, that is the indigenous population, will be powerless to break down. As long as the Arabs preserve a gleam of hope that they will succeed in getting rid of us, nothing in the world can cause them to relinquish this hope, precisely because they are not a rabble, but a living people. And a living people will be ready to yield on such fateful issues only when they give up all hope of getting rid of the alien settlers. Jabotinsky is talking about his Zionist Jews as alien settlers. He understands. And actually, this is the guy who guides Israeli policy now. And I would say consistently since the founding of the State of Israel. They are, what we watch when they bomb Gaza is they are still hoping to get the Palestinians to relinquish the hope, which they will not. So again, Jabotinsky, the Arabs understood Zionist aspirations very well. Remember, we're still talking 1923 here. And their decision to resist them, which they were already resisting then, was only natural. There was no misunderstanding between Jew and Arab, but a natural conflict. No agreement was possible with the Palestinian Arab. They would accept Zionism only when they found themselves up against an iron wall, when they realized they had no alternative but to accept Jewish settlement. The iron wall is Western imperialism and the machinery of war that Western imperialism can provide. The forced expulsion of 850,000 Palestinians, the Nakba, was the precondition for the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Since then, Zionism has meant that the survival of the Jewish state as Jewish, i.e. not a state of all its citizens, Zionism today is used to justify all those atrocities we see committed again and again against Palestinians. The Arab ruling classes have long since accommodated to doing business with Israel, but the Arab peoples support the struggle for Palestinian liberation. There is an inbuilt instability to the top-heavy, obscenely rich Arab elites and the oppressed Arab masses kept largely in poverty. We saw it in the Arab Spring, a moment of enormous hope across the Arab world, across the world, for us as well here. It confirmed for us that the Palestinian question was at the heart of what liberation for the Arab masses meant. They went to the Israeli embassy in Tahrir Square. They went twice. They closed it down in the first days of the Arab revolt. But all this confirmed for the US that in the Middle East, only Israel can be counted on to be totally loyal to US imperialist interests. Israel is a colonial settler project. By definition, that's a racist project. Zionism is the ideology of a colonial settler project. It's racist. Zionism underlies the continued ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and justifies, to Zionists, a state in which only Jews have rights. This is apartheid. This is racism. B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, Amnesty International for years, and just recently this year, Human Rights Watch, have recognized this. But more importantly, what happened this year? I think on the back of Black Lives Matter, it opened what happened when the atrocities started again against the people in Sheikh Jarrah, the shooting of worshippers at the Al-Azhar Mosque, and then the bombing of Gaza, was that the working classes of the world recognized the racism and started to act in solidarity with Palestinians. That's it. Yeah. Okay, so the main debate was really started, I think, by Norman, or Keith, who said, Bundism failed. I'll say it failed. The Holocaust happened. It was eliminated. Bundism was eliminated as millions of Jews went to the gas chambers. That's not, I think you said at some point, not successful. No, they failed. Zionism succeeded, got a state of Israel. The problem for us is what lessons we draw from that. What lessons do we draw from the Holocaust happening about the fight to stop it again? Do we draw a lesson if racism as it is now rises again? Of course, not just against the Jews. Anti-Semitism is there in Europe, of course, in France, pretty shit. But basically, it's against Muslims in Europe at the moment. It's against Black people as ever. It's against gypsies as ever. Are we saying as the rise in racism happens, we go, oh, better get out. Blacks better get back to Africa and the Caribbean. Gypsies better get back to, where? Roma? Yeah, they did well there, didn't they? Jews go to Israel. Yes, that we're all going to be safe in our ethnically defined homelands. No, we don't say that because, as someone else pointed out, we don't have an option when racism rises. Those Bundists couldn't get out anyway. They were working, they were living there. When Bernie Grant in the 1980s said, give us some money and we'll go back to the Caribbean, anti-racists, many Black people were outraged. They said, what are you doing? You're giving the racists a tool. You're saying we'll go back, we'll get out, we're not wanted here. No, we're Black British. And actually, many, many Jews at the beginning of the 20th century, when the Zionists were saying, we want to go to Palestine, They said, no, what are you talking about? You're giving a weapon to anti-Semites to say, we don't want to be here. We're not really British Jews. We really want to be somewhere else. It's a weapon to racists to say, we'll go, we're not wanted. Let's go, we're horrible, we're different, you don't like us, we're impossible, we're a disorder in the stomach, we'll go. It is a weapon to racists to give in to that. What is our response as socialists? When racism raises its head, not just against the Jews, against any minority group, we recognize it as a threat to the working class, as a threat to all of us, as a threat to them and other groups, and a matter of fighting against it. The lessons we draw from the Holocaust is never again. What do you understand by never again? I don't understand it just about the Jews never again. I understand it as racism will not claim a minority, will not claim dividing the working class so that there could be another Holocaust again. I want to go back actually to my final slide, which you may think is a bit weird to do at this time, but I'm going to go to it because it's the heart of the matter. The divide between those who wanted to fight for their rights as part of the fight of rights for all, i.e. universal human rights. That's us, socialists. And those who said this would never happen, that Jews would never gain those rights unless they had their own Jewish state, can be exemplified by two Jews born at the end of the 19th century. People at this meeting won't need an introduction to Trotsky. I've already introduced you at this meeting to Jabotinsky. Both from Odessa, a multicultural port of the Russian Empire. Trotsky stood for revolution and an end to all discrimination and racism for all peoples. Jabotinsky stood for using military force to remove the Palestinians and create a Jewish state. At heart, this is a division between the optimism, which says we can create societies where people live together without racism, and the pessimism, which casts humanity as eternally racist and anti-Semitic. And I think a lot of people in the meeting answered those questions as well. I want to go, obviously it's not time to talk about everything. People said so many fantastic things. I mean, I love the way Christoph put it, that, it's the fault of many governments. At the end, Norman said, whose fault? Well, Christoph gave a good answer. It's the fault of many governments. But of course, the British government, absolutely paramountly important in the birth of the Jewish state in 1948. Without Britain's help, not likely to happen. Someone, just to mention one important step on Britain's help for the Zionists in the creation of the Jewish state, was what they did to the Arabs in the Arab revolt. Someone early on, I think it was Keith, right early on, mentioned the Zionist terror gangs, the Lehi, the Stern gang. But actually, it was the Haganah, it was the kind of official Jewish army that was growing under the protection of the British. And when the Arab revolt happened in 1936, there was a massive revolt, a massive uprising across Palestine against Jewish immigration and the theft of their lands. And the Brits had to call, it was the biggest insurgency this colonial power had faced, the biggest. They had to draft in soldiers from everywhere. It's so interesting. Someone mentioned Ireland. I never knew that, but obviously it fits. But they drafted in Zionists into the British police forces, and they armed them, and they helped them become the proto-army that was to exist after the war. So during that time, if you wore a kafia, the peasant, the Arab scarf, you could be caged, you could be changed. If you were an Arab with a gun, you were hung. They executed thousands. It's an important part of what happened to the balance of forces in Palestine, which led to the British helping, but also the Zionists' growth in arms and equipment and ability to organize what happened in 47 and 48, the ethnic cleansing, which led to the creation of the State of Israel. So yes, we haven't got time for all of everything. So people covered so many things. Thank you to Mary and Gail. That were brilliant points being made, very articulately everywhere. Yeah, and again, Peter bringing up how the left supported Zionism. The myths that have been supported are so, they stagger you, such that it even crept into this meeting somewhere about a Bible story, which is taken as history. You know what? We have to be aware this has been used. Ben-Gurion said, Ben-Gurion, the major architect, the first prime minister of Israel, I mean, really, so important. He sanctioned Plan Delta, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the massacre at Deir Yassin, the massacre at Tentura. This is the architect, Ben-Gurion, secular to his toenails. But he said, the Bible is our ID card. We're going to use it to claim the land. So cynical. And he did. But let's not fall for it, you know. Christian Zionism, sorry, guys, I've got to read one thing to you. People have mentioned about how Zionists, well, they like anti-Semites. Otherwise, if there's no anti-Semitism, there's no use for Zionism. If there's no anti-Semitism, there's no call for an Israeli state. So they join with all sorts of vicious anti-Semites. John Hadji, anyone heard of him? Christian Zionist, president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Quote, Adolf Hitler was a hunter sent by God who was tasked with expediting God's will of having the Jews re-establish a state of Israel, unquote. His support of Israel has been welcomed by the Anti-Defamation League and by Benjamin Netanyahu, lately Prime Minister, who said, the good news is that Israel is not alone. It has your support when addressing a rally of Hadji's 1 million strong Christian United for Israel. Nice friends, nice allies. But I've said to people who said it's about Christian Zionism, no. It's not about the lobby in the States. It's not about the number of Christian Zionists. It's because America is an island off the coast of Eurasia, as Henry Kissinger put it. It's an island. Where are the markets? Where are the populations? Look at a map. America is an island. It needs to be in the Eurasian landmass. Oh, it lost Iran. That would have been a good one. It had it for a long time. Lost it. Think about the boost that gives to the resistance under the flag of Islam. Is Iran kicked out Western imperialism? Oh, 20 years in Afghanistan, didn't manage. They have not got a base there. They're going. The Americans are going after 20 years. It's hard. They tried Iraq. We'll change the regime there and build a base there. No. Chaos.
2 minutes, Miriam.
Okay, I'll go very quickly. I'm trying to say Israel is so important to them. They fail everywhere else. Israel and the US are tied together in a knot. Now, that does not mean that Israel is off the leash. The last questions, I think it was, from Tim and Peter, the discussion moved on to Israel now and what it's doing. Israel can't do what it wants. It's got nuclear weapons. It could start bombing nuclear weapons. It's only going to do what the US allows it to do. Yes, its economy is now practically independent, actually, of the US, but not its arms. Its arms, its military, its basis is US support. So as we saw this time, Biden went in and stopped Netanyahu. He didn't want to stop. He wanted to carry on bombing till there was no gleam of hope left. He was stopped because the instability it was causing amongst the Arab states was just that little bit too much. It is by definition unstable. The Middle East is unstable. Most countries are unstable. Where do we ally with in this? The road to Jerusalem lies through Cairo. Tim said it, Tim explained it very well. It is the masses of people in the Middle East whose interest is against their leaders, is against imperialism, is against the colonialism that they recognize is in Palestine and that they suffered for a century. These are the masses that can create change. And when they do, we can create the solidarity with them. The Palestinians inspire everyone. I mean, we're in a little SWP meeting. We know our working class isn't fighting under conditions where it's quite easy to fight, and they don't even raise their head. We haven't got an opposition party. And then the Palestinians, after 73 years of oppression, create a general strike and a level of solidarity through all the places they are. People brought up the refugee camps, and they should always bring that up, never leave them out. Gaza, West Bank, refugee camps, and in Israel itself. A solidarity which has never been matched. And the solidarity in the world has never been matched either. It is its highest level ever. And someone else said we should not let that stop. The solidarity with Palestine is absolutely important for them and also for us. Okay, last thing. Tim said about where they can go, Eretz Israel. I don't believe they can. They've already got on the one state. Let's not crap about here. Sorry, lost my vocabulary. There is one state. Who's telling you any different? There is one state. It is Israel. There are tiny little pockets which the Palestine Authority does not control. It just collaborates over. There is the Gaza, an open prison, and there's the West, I've just described the West Bank. There is one state, Israel. That's what it's called. And within that state, Palestinians have to fight for their rights. They're ordinary, human, secular, one person, one vote rights. Now, that is the model the rest of us try and follow throughout the world. I know we don't manage. You'll have refugees without any right to recourse to public funds at the moment. But we understand the model. The model is from the French Revolution. Not, by the way, the German Revolution, the Volk, the ethnic state, the purity of the race. No, the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. That's our model. Fight, one person, one vote, one state solution. There's already one state, and anyone who says different is just pulling the wool over your eyes. So let's draw the lessons. Let's fight racism here and everywhere. And let's fight for Palestine solidarity. Cheers, everyone.